Welcome to the IDPro Show, the best channel for hearing about how to grow your career in digital identity. I'm Heather Flanagan, Executive Director of IDPro and Principal Editor for the IDPro Body of Knowledge.
I'm Chris Cochran from AKA Identity, and we're here to introduce you to the world of expert insights and in-depth discussions with people working in the identity space. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting your journey, we are here to bring you the best tips, trips, and career advice.
And we're here today to talk with Dr. Tina Srivastava. She is an MIT trained rocket scientist. She's an entrepreneur, a technology expert, an author, and the inventor of more than 30 patents, which is patently amazing. She's one of the new IDPro board members. And seriously, Tina, is there anything that you don't do? Welcome.
Thanks for the kind introduction, Heather.
We have to talk a little bit about your background, right? You have a background in aerospace and cybersecurity. Was there anything in aerospace that colored your role in identity?
Yeah, I think it's a very helpful background coming from aerospace and national security. You learn about focusing on things that are mission critical and taking things with a level of seriousness. And I think that's necessary for identity. When we think about what identity allows people to access, it's the way they access the economy, it's the way they access bank, healthcare. We have to give it that same critical importance. So I think that mission driven focus was a helpful background.
So rumor has it, though, you really got some skin in the game when it comes to experiencing what happens when your data is exposed to the world. So talk a little bit more about, how that's influenced your approach to working in the field of identity.
Yes, unfortunately, Heather, I do have more skin in the game than most. So working in national security meant that my fingerprints, these fingerprints right here, were stored in the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM. And as we've heard back in 2015, the OPM database was breached.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an eye opening moment for me that how can I prove that I'm Tina without giving up everything I used to prove who I am? There's got to be a better way. And that's really what led me to the field of identity, to Badge, where we do identity without secrets.
I got to say, that's one of the things that's always freaked me out a little bit, where the amount of proof that organizations are getting into the habit of requiring, when it's like, you know what, you don't actually need to know that. You don't actually need biometrics from me. All you need to know is, am I affiliated with something? And yet that creep of no, but if we know everything about you, then you are more valuable to us. And so we'll just keep asking.
Yeah, that's a great point, Heather. And I hate it too. And I think that it's certainly an overreach. And especially when these companies that store our data are not good stewards of it
Mm-hmm.
and lead to breach after breach of our data getting compromised.
We got to talk a little bit about additional lessons learned, right? You were chief engineer at Raytheon to now co-founding Badge. What are the lessons learned from engineering large-scale defense systems that have been most applicable to building identity solutions?
Yeah, great question, Chris. When you think about large scale mission critical systems, it's important to think about architectures that are going to be scalable and resilient. And those were some of the lessons we brought to Badge. Our system is, Kubernetes, horizontally auto scalable. I think these industry best practices are critical and should be embraced by folks. It allows for resilience, and you have to be prepared for disaster recovery, offline scenarios, people operating, unfortunately, we've seen with hurricane areas. And identity needs to be resilient to that as well. You talk about, situations where people lose their tokens, they lose their, access. And so how can you have an identity system that is resilient to the loss of these hardware devices? And I think that lesson is really critical when you think about military and those types of mission critical situations.
So I know you were at Identiverse because you did the innovation workshop, which was pretty darn awesome. But there was a session there by Justin Richer called Federation Bubbles. And his use case was actually that kind of model of, you've got this moment in the defense industry, for example, where you are out to sea and you're running exercises with other countries, and you need that like in the moment identity management aspect of saying, okay, for now the French can access this thing, and yet nobody's connected fully to the internet because it's a safety thing. It's like the complications that come with some of the government spaces are, I think, eye-opening in terms of what IAM could or should be.
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. It is eye-opening. And thinking about these situations, there are a lot of hurdles. Connectivity is a hurdle, secrecy is a hurdle, and intellectual property can be a hurdle. When you think about innovation, the innovation workshop you mentioned that we ran, that I ran with Pam Dingle and Bob Blakely at Identiverse, was a great session. We were so overwhelmed by how many folks participated and the feedback afterwards. It seems like that people had this question that they were waiting to ask. And we talked about a range of these issues, like how to deal with intellectual property constraints, how to deal with the fact that, many of us go to places like Identiverse and collaborate on IDPro, and how do we share the problems that we're facing without revealing proprietary information. And this is a critical area that we all have to face and overcome so that we can collaborate and move forward.
I don't think there's a company or organization, and I'm going to go ahead and include government aspects into this, that isn't an identity company, as it were, even though they don't know it. And I think that leads to, there's a lot of engineers out there who maybe are just starting to realize that they're actually in the field of identity. As these poor souls are learning this new reality, what do you think would be some good advice to offer them based on your own career shift of what an engineer needs to think about as they are approaching identity?
I think that it's important to think about how identity needs to serve everyone. And a lot of times we sit in our Silicon Valley bubbles of, oh, everyone has an iPhone and a backup iPhone, and that's how they can connect to their multi factor requirements to access their systems. Well, that's not how the world really works. We know that people access their data from shared library workstations, that people have one device that a family or community shares. We know that in situations where women are in a domestic relationship, sometimes even though they have access to device, like a phone, they don't necessarily have autonomy and control over that device. And so we need to make sure that the people that come into the community to work on identity are really open-minded about what's necessary for inclusivity. Because again, identity is the new perimeter. Identity is how we access the world. If we don't have a digital identity, we can't access the economy, our healthcare, our banking, our data. And so we need to make sure that that access is available for everyone.
When you talk about inclusivity, you talk about diversity of thought. What is one thing that people probably don't realize about the benefits of diversity that you feel like they should know today?
Yeah, I think that the point is that we have to recognize that our own experiences may not be the same as other people's experiences. And one of the things that we focused on in product development is ensuring that, for example, accessibility is something that was addressed early on, and making sure that we're not biased towards what sighted people can do. And that was one of the benefits of badge, that we had that testing done to show that it could work and provide the flexibility that people that may have certain impairments are still able to access the system.
Mhm.
And I think many times when we assume a solution works, oh, you just use one device to scan a QR code on another device, that doesn't really work for people that have visual impairments, just as an example. And so these are things we need to be open minded about, give people options, and make sure that there is an easy and accessible option for everyone.
I love go to market. I started my career as a practitioner and a leader, but then I soon pivoted into telling the story, right? How do you find product market fit? How do you message it? You've obviously built quite a few solutions in the cybersecurity and identity space. What are some of the challenges about bringing new technology to the market, whether you're talking commercial or government?
Yes, that is something I have lived through. And I would say that one that maybe needs to be talked about more is intellectual property and patents. I think they're very important when you're entering a new market to have that defensibility of your solution, but also being able to think through other types of ways to leverage that, from licensing models to other types of models. Those are really critical. One of the things when you work in the defense world is that there are some different hoops you have to jump through when it comes to intellectual property. And I strongly advise startups that are getting funding from the government for different grants to be aware of the implications of the intellectual property constraints and make sure that those don't impact how they might be able to in the future raise tier one venture capital funding, for instance.
Mm-hmm. The working in the standard space, that like one of the biggest differentiators in a way of the standards organizations is how exactly are you handling IP when you've got all of these competing companies coming together to work together on a standard? Because if they did it in any other way, that would be collusion and that would be bad. But if they do it in the standards process, then it's good. But you've still got the IP that you've got to be aware of and signal. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, I got to talk about your book. I got to do it. So, because I have a copy, and that's the problem with digital books is you're like, oh, I got a copy. Can you sign it? No. What am I going to do? Have you sign my iPad where I've got my Kindle? It just doesn't quite. It's not the same. But I digress. Okay, so innovating in a secret world. Now that explores the future of national security and leadership. So, how do you see digital identity fitting into that future, especially as we think about securing personal and national information?
Yeah, great question. And I I have a copy for you, so no fear. I'll get it autographed. I care deeply about national security and making sure that we're solving the problems of utmost importance. And a lot of that involves a leap in technical innovation that hasn't been there before. And one of the things I focus on in my book is how we can have that inclusion, including different innovators in the process of innovation. And specifically, some of the ways that we go about innovating exclude certain innovators. So, tying back to what we were just talking about with intellectual property, I talk about an example from the pharmaceutical world. Now, this is another industry cloaked in secrecy for good reason, right? They spend a lot of money on the R&D to develop new drugs, and if a competitor was able to access that information and get the lead, then they wouldn't really get the return on that R&D investment that they made. And so that level of competition and the high expense of developing drugs has led to this secrecy and the need for intellectual property. So how can an industry like that learn to embrace open innovation? Well, I talk about Roche as an example, and they were a company that decided to embrace open innovation. So they were trying to solve a particular problem, and they had spent many, many years on this problem. It had to do with accurately measuring a sample before it gets tested by one of their analyzers. And accurately measuring that sample really has a strong benefit in the results. But it was very difficult to accurately measure it. There are a lot of challenges. And so Roche actually embraced open innovation. They used a platform called Innocentive to post what their problem was. So, what does that mean? Well, that means admitting to your competitors that you have a problem that you haven't solved and listing it out there. Mm-hmm. Well, this challenge lasted 60 days, and in that time frame, they actually did receive a submission that allowed them to solve the problem. So that's a success. That's great. But an additional takeaway is that in those 60 days, they received every idea that they had tried in the past in their internal R&D. So when you think about that, years of research, years of dedicated R&D, and of course, when it's internal R&D, you have to fund every attempt, even if it fails. Here, they only had to pay for the one idea that succeeded.
Mhm.
And so this is a way that you can actually embrace innovation. And I think that the identity community can do more to leverage innovation challenges, innovation opportunities. And what's really important is that open innovation is a way to allow people outside of your internal community to help suggest ideas to overcome innovation. So, highly recommend that be an option that is explored in the identity community so that we can get more people participating and involved and contributing ideas so we can be inclusive about innovation.
You are making me think of a really interesting service that IDPro might be able to offer. We should talk about that.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
You and me, we're having a conversation after this call.
Sounds
I,
good.
I love it. I love that idea altogether. And speaking of innovation, one of the things that people ask me all the time is, what is the mindset or the skill that's the most important in cybersecurity? And quite often I say intellectual agility, because things change all the time. If you get stuck in one mode of doing things, if you get stuck on one technology, you're eventually going to be left behind. But you're an MIT lecturer, so you're really speaking to the people that are going to innovate for generations to come. So in your perspective, what is that one skill set, or what is that one way of thinking that is most important from your perspective?
So I think it's to not blame the user.
Yeah.
Mm.
Sometimes we have a very high expectation on users, and we tend to have some parties that blame users. Oh, well, you didn't create a complex enough password and rotate it every 90 days and make sure it was unique for every application. Well, that's a very high burden on a user.
Mm.
And same with our recovery mechanisms, having a seed phrase, hiding it in your sock drawer, not letting anyone else have that. I mean, the burdens that we're placing on users is very high. We need to reach a world where it's easy, and the easiest option is actually the most secure option. So that's the guidance I would give the next generation of innovators and developers is trying not to blame the user.
I love that so much. And I've actually gotten into an interesting debate. And I think debate is healthy. So it was a good conversation to have. But the point I was making at the time was, all right, yeah, you can give, by all means, make it so the user has options and can make decisions, but don't actually expect them to read all of that. They don't want to.
Mhm.
They just want to get to the thing they want to get to. And I was told that I had a very paternalistic attitude, that I was making decisions for the users. And I'm going, I'm talking about my mom, dude. I know she's not going to read this stuff. So, but it was an interesting, you know, if you take away choice from the user and say, no, look, this is a secure, easiest thing. Would you just do that? It's better and worse at the same time. I don't know how to resolve that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I also think that the same goes with privacy, which is sort of related to what you're saying. It shouldn't be, three menus down to uncheck a box in order to maintain privacy. It should be the default. It should be the given. And
Yeah.
coming back around to data breaches, this is something I think is critical. I don't think people should amass private data about you, and if there's a way to authenticate without giving up your private data, that's got to be something we focus on, and we again make the default so that your mom doesn't have to read three paragraphs to figure out what she's choosing to relinquish her rights to, because at that point it's not choosing, it's taking away those rights.
Yeah. Yeah. 42-page EULA. All right. So we've talked about innovation, and we've talked about the next generation, and we've talked about some really interesting inclusivity concepts. I want to look a little bit at something else that you've got a lot of experience in, which is, you've held roles in really, really big companies and startups, which seems like a pretty broad range. I mean, what are the key differences that you've observed in how these organizations, big and small, approach security and identity challenges?
Question the norm and question kind of how things are done. There tends to be a lot of inertia with large companies that, well, this is how we've done it, so this is the way it's done. And sometimes you get the advantage, being a smaller company coming in, to say that, hey, does that actually make sense? Is that reasonable? And it allows you to approach things from a new direction. We also find that it's important, whether you're at a large company or a small company, to collaborate. I think it's very critical to work with other companies, find partnerships that make sense, and not work in isolation. And that can be a lesson for both. So if you're a very large company, you can feel that, hey, I already have hundreds of thousands of people in this company. There's so much collaboration to do, even internally, that it can kind of isolate you. So it's important to keep that as a priority. And then also, as a startup who's got so much to do, running at 100 miles an hour, to make sure to take the time, which can seem like a big sacrifice, to go to these events like Authenticate and Identiverse and IIW coming up.
We got to talk about the future for a second, because I do feel like we're at a technological inflection point, right? Whether you're looking at AI, biometrics, there's just so much to technology today. But what would you say over the next 5 years? What do you think is going to happen in terms of advancements in identity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're definitely at an acceleration point with technology. Badge was recently invited to present to the Congressional AI Caucus,
Mm,
and one of the topics was on privacy and how do we safeguard our digital futures. And one of the things we talked about were the advancements in phishing and how AI is exacerbating phishing emails. So they,
right.
went from pretty easy to detect messages that, you can just know that that's spam. Either your spam filter would catch it, or if you read it, it would be very easy to know that this was fraudulent, to very advanced, proper grammar, having compelling reasons why you should click a particular link. And I think that has just emphasized the need for phishing resistant technologies, and ensuring that we're aware that we cannot rely on, phishing detection of these emails. I think another thing, as these situations emerge, is just the importance of authenticity in a world of Gen AI.
Hmm.
It's going to be increasingly important that we know that, the same human that registered is this human that authenticated later, that made that particular post, that sent that particular message. And I think we'll see the emphasis on those technologies in the future, as well as privacy enhancing technologies. Because I think when we think about what makes us human, what makes us unique, what makes us us, keeping that data out of the digital world, not storing that critical data, can help us as these technologies evolve.
I got to help work on a paper. I had a small contribution to it, but I did get my name was therefore in there on the need to develop personhood credentials. And it wasn't trying to solve the problem, but it was basically a call to action saying, okay, no, really, we need to solve this problem. I agree. I think that's going to be a really big deal. I want to ask, because I can. You're one of my board members on IDPro. What made you want to be an IDPro board member?
It's been an honor to serve, and I'm so glad to start this journey with IDPro. Ian Glazer asked me to consider joining, and it was something that I spent time looking into. I met with several IDPro board members to understand what I would be getting into. When I joined the community, Vittorio was the most welcoming person. He doesn't always start out that way, but he becomes a big softie once you talk to him. And he gave a session at IIW, a lot of the 101 sessions. And I think that spirit of community and spirit of helping each other, what the work you do, Heather, with the body of knowledge, these are all really just meant to be tools to help people who enter the identity community to learn what are the basics, what's the foundation, so that they can contribute and that their voice can be heard. And so I think that that is an important enabler for our whole community to get people up to speed. And I'm excited about the vision that we have in the future and all the things that we can enable and all of the strategic initiatives and ideas and roadmaps. And it's a great community of people to work with, from different types of companies, the largest companies in the world to the smallest companies in the world, and people that are just excited to help others. And that's a great community to be part of.
You heard it here first, folks. Join IDPro, whether you're talking about an individual member or an organization that wants to be a part of this incredible community that we have cooking over here at IDPro. Dr. Tina, I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us a little bit about identity and technology and leadership. Everyone out there that's watching, wherever you're watching this, thank you for spending some time with us. And definitely thank you to IDPro and AKI Identity for allowing Heather and I to go down this crazy journey of identity practitioners. And with that, we will see everyone in the next episode.